Playing with Power MTG. Powerful cards, powerful formats. The Playing with Power podcast is back. Check out episodes about threat assessment, deck building, and leveling up your CEDH game. Each week we release new episodes on YouTube and your favorite podcast aggregator. Also, be sure to follow us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok. Get high-quality tweets and the dankest of memes all when you follow. Now, let's start out by showcasing our fighters this evening. First, we have our Mox Pearl patron Chad, piloting Falco Spara, Pact Weaver. This deck seeks to win with its commander and Sensei's Divining Top or through a classic Hermit Druid line. Chad's opening hand contains a Tropical Island, Noble Hierarch, Machias the Lunarch, Otawara Soaring City, Devoted Druid, Green Sun Zenith, and a Veil of Summer. Next, we have Zach, piloting the partner pair of Tymna the Weaver and Kraum Ludovic's Opus. This deck grinds value with its commanders before going for a Breach, Brain Freeze, or Oracle line. Zach's opening hand contains an Ancient Tomb, Felwar Stone, Mystical Tutor, Bloodstained Mire, and his 3 London Mulligans are Drenith Magistrate, Watery Grave, and a Windswept Heath. After that we have Cal, piloting Prosper, Tomebound. This deck grinds value with its commander and wins with Ad Nauseam or Dockside Loops. Cal's opening hand contains a Mountain, Cabal Ritual, Ad Nauseam, Bloodstained Mire, Skirk Prospector, Reign of Filth, and a City of Traders. Finally, we have Ryan, piloting Rocco, Cabaretti Caterer. This deck seeks to cast Rocco, fetch up and kill Arena Rector, and then win with traditional Kiki Felidar lines. Ryan's opening hand contains an Arcane Signet, Shatterskull Smashing, Cathar Commando, Plateau, Dockside Extortionist, Sol Ring, and a Boseiju Who Endures. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you want to see more like this, be sure to subscribe. Without further ado, let's kick off this Fiendish Fierce Final Fiesta. Chad won the Med School speedrun and gets to start us off. Chad draws a card for turn and plays a Tropical Island. He casts a Noble Hierarch and passes the turn. Zach draws and plays an Ancient Tomb. He taps it to cast a Felwar Stone. Zach ends his turn. Cal draws and plays a Bloodstained Mire. He cracks it, pays a life, and fetches up a Badlands onto the battlefield. He casts a Skirk Prospector and passes to Ryan. Ryan draws and plays a Plateau. He casts a Sol Ring. He casts an Arcane Signet. Ryan ships the turn. Chad draws and plays an Otawara Soaring City as his land for turn. He casts Green Sun Zenith where X equals 2. He fetches up a Hermit Druid onto the battlefield, shuffling Green Suns back into his library. The team realizes that they are in trouble as Chad gives the turn to Zach. At the end of Chad's turn, Zach casts Mystical Tutor, fetching up a Wheel of Fortune onto the top of his library. Zach draws and plays a Bloodstained Mire. He taps his Ancient Tomb to cast Wheel of Fortune. Everyone discards their hand and draws 7. Zach casts Mox Opal and passes to Cal. Cal draws, plays a Marsh Flats, and passes. Ryan draws and casts a Mana Crypt. He plays a Cavern of Souls, naming Elf as it enters. He casts Arbor Elf. He casts a Wild Growth and sends the turn to Chad. At the end of Ryan's turn, Zach cracks his Bloodstained Mire, pays a life, and fetches up an Underground Sea onto the battlefield. Also in the end step, Cal cracks his Marsh Flats, pays a life, and fetches up a Blood Crypt, into play untapped, paying 2 life. Cal casts a Braid, killing Chad's Hermit Druid. The turn moves to Chad. Chad draws and plays a Scalding Tarn. He cracks it, pays a life, and fetches up a Tundra onto the battlefield. He casts Rashmi, Eternity's Crafter. Chad passes. Zach draws and plays a Plateau. He taps his Ancient Tomb to cast Talisman of Dominance. He casts his commander, Tymna the Weaver. Zach gives the turn to Cal. Cal draws and plays a Command Tower. He cracks his Skirk Prospector to cast his commander, Prosper Tomebound. He moves to his end step, Prosper triggers, and Cal exiles Wooded Foothills off of the top of his library. Cal passes. During his upkeep, Ryan wins his Mana Crypt roll. He draws and plays a Bloodstained Mire. He cracks it, pays a life, and fetches up a Taiga onto the battlefield. He casts its commander, Rocco, Cabaretti Caterer, where X equals 4. He fetches up an Arena Rector onto the battlefield. Ryan casts Reckless Rage, targeting Rashmi and his own Arena Rector. In response, Zach casts an Offer You Can't Refuse. Reckless Rage is countered, and Ryan creates 2 treasures. Next, Ryan casts Gamble. He fetches up a card into his hand and then randomly discards an Ancient Tomb. Ryan suspends Greater Gargadon. He activates Greater Gargadon, sacrificing Arena Rector to remove a suspend counter. Arena Rector triggers and, in response, Zach exiles Simian Spirit Guide from his hand, adding a red. He casts Brain Freeze, with all copies targeting Ryan. Ryan then mills 15 cards, including his Kiki Jiki. Then Arena Rector's ability resolves, Ryan exiles it, and fetches up a Vivian on the Hunt onto the battlefield. He activates Vivian's first ability, sacrificing Rocco, and fetches up a Felidar Guardian onto the battlefield. Felidar enters, and Ryan flickers Vivian on the Hunt. Ryan activates Vivian, sacrificing Felidar, and fetches up a Karmic Guide onto the battlefield. Karmic Guide enters and reanimates Felidar Guardian. Felidar enters and flickers Karmic Guide. Karmic Guide enters and reanimates Kiki Jiki. Ryan activates Kiki, creating a copy of Felidar Guardian. Ryan presents a loop of flickering Kiki with his copies of Felidar Guardian, then creating a copy of Felidar, creating infinite Felidar tokens. Ryan moves to combat, attacks with its infinite hasty Felidars, and Ryan wins the game. Since that was a fast game, the team decided to go again. In this game, Ryan brings back Rocco, Cabaretti Caterer, and his opening hand contains a Shatterskull Smashing, Llanowar Elves, Verdant Catacombs, Gaia's Cradle, Infernal Plunge, Imperial Recruiter, and his London Mulligan is an Eternal Witness. Next, we have Chad piloting Rashmi, Eternity's Crafter. This deck seeks to control the board, resolve lurking predators, and win with overwhelming creatures. Chad's opening hand contains a Mox Diamond, Otawara Soaring City, Verdant Catacombs, Beseju Who Endures, Island, Mana Drain, and a Carpet of Flowers. Zach brings back Tymna the Weaver and Kraum Ludovic's Opus, and his opening hand contains a Diabolic Intent, Dockside Extortionist, Rite of Flame, City of Brass, Dress Down, Force of Negation, and his London Mulligan is a Draneth Magistrate. Cal brings back Prosper Tomebound, and his opening hand contains a Vampiric Tutor, Dockside Extortionist, Polluted Delta, Mana Vault, Wheel of Misfortune, Shatter Skull Smashing, and a Reanimate. And Ryan gets to start us off. Ryan draws and plays a Verdant Catacombs. He cracks it, pays a life, and fetches up a Taiga onto the battlefield. He casts a Llanowar Elves. Ryan passes. Chad draws and plays a Verdant Catacombs. He casts a Mox Diamond, discarding an island. Chad ends his turn. Zach draws, plays a City of Brass, and passes. Cal draws and plays a Polluted Delta. He cracks it, pays a life, and fetches up a Badlands onto the battlefield. He casts a Soul Ring. He casts a Mana Vault. Cal ends his turn. Ryan draws and plays a Gaia's Cradle. He casts Imperial Recruiter. In response, Chad cracks his Verdant Catacombs, pays a life, and fetches up a Tropical Island onto the battlefield. He casts a Mana Drain, countering Recruiter. Ryan ships the turn. Chad draws, and in his first main phase, he has 3 colorless through Mana Drain. He plays a Misty Rainforest. He casts his commander, Rashmi, Eternity's Crafter. Chad passes. Zach draws, plays a Volcanic Island, and passes. Cal draws and plays a Shatter Skull, the Hammer Pass, into play untapped, paying 3 life. He casts his commander, Prosper Tomebound. He moves to his end step, Prosper triggers, and Cal exiles Cabal Ritual. The turn moves to Ryan. Ryan draws and also plays a Shatter Skull, the Hammer Pass, into play untapped, paying 3 life. He casts Survival of the Fittest. Ryan passes. At the end of Ryan's turn, Chad cracks his Misty Rainforest, pays a life, and fetches up a Breeding Pool into play tapped. Chad draws and plays an Otawara Soaring City as his land for turn. He casts Carpet of Flowers. Rashmi triggers, and Chad reveals a Veil of Summer into his hand. He moves to combat and attacks Zach with Rashmi. Zach takes it, and Chad passes the turn. At the end of Chad's turn, Zach casts a Brainstorm, drawing 3 and putting 2 back on top. Zach draws and plays a Bloodstained Mire. He cracks it, pays a life, and fetches up an Underground Sea onto the battlefield. He casts Rite of Flame, adding 2 red. He casts Dockside Extortionist. In response, Chad channels Beseju Who Endures, targeting Survival of the Fittest. In response, Ryan activates Survival of the Fittest, discarding Skyclave Apparition and fetching up a Dockside Extortionist into his hand. Then Survival is destroyed, and Ryan fetches up a Savannah onto the battlefield. With Dockside still on the stack, Chad casts Reset. Rashmi triggers, and Chad reveals a Dispel into his hand. With Reset still on the stack, Ryan casts Eladamri's Call. He fetches up an Arena Rector into his hand. Then Reset resolves, and Chad untaps his lands. Then Dockside resolves, and Zach creates 4 treasures. Zach casts Diabolic Intent, sacrificing Dockside as an additional cost. He fetches up a card into his hand. He casts Wheel of Fortune. Ryan sighs, and Chad responds by casting Veil of Summer, drawing a card as it resolves. Chad then flashes in a Dress Down. It enters, and he draws a card again. Then everyone discards their hand and draws 7. Zach casts a Lion's Eye Diamond and passes the turn. At the end of Zach's turn, Dress Down is sacrificed. Cal draws and plays a Black Cleave Cliffs into play untapped. He casts Lelia, the Blade Reforged. He moves to combat and attacks Zach with Lelia. Lelia triggers, and Cal exiles Calling the Weak off of the top of his library. Lelia triggers and gets a +1/+1 counter. Zach takes it, and in his second main phase, Cal casts Cabal Ritual from exile. Prosper triggers, and Cal creates a treasure, then he adds 3 black. He casts Mayhem Devil. Cal moves to his end step, Prosper triggers, and Cal exiles Bolus's Citadel. Lelia triggers and gets a counter. The turn moves to Ryan. Ryan draws and plays a Stomping Ground into play untapped, paying 2 life. He casts Carpet of Flowers. He moves to a second main phase and adds 2 green through his carpet. He casts Birds of Paradise. He casts Avacyn's Pilgrim. He casts Elvish Mystic. He casts a Soul Ring. Now just swimming in mana, Ryan passes to Chad. Chad draws, and in his first main phase, he adds 2 blue through his carpet. He plays a Polluted Delta. He cracks it and pays a life. Mayhem Devil triggers and kills Ryan's Birds of Paradise. He then fetches up an island onto the battlefield. He casts Jin-Gitaxias, Progress Tyrant. The entire table groans as Rashmi triggers. In response, Chad pays 2 life to cast Noxious Revival, putting Manglehorn from his graveyard onto the top of his library. Then Rashmi's trigger resolves, Chad reveals Manglehorn, casting it. It enters and targets Cal's Mana Vault. In response, Cal casts Deflecting Swat for its alternate cost, targeting Manglehorn's ability, redirecting it to Chad's Mox Diamond. Diamond is destroyed, then Jin-Gitaxias resolves. Chad casts Lotus Petal. Jin-Gitaxias triggers, and Chad creates a copy. Chad moves to combat and attacks Zach with Rashmi. Zach takes it, and all through, Chad ends his turn. Zach draws and plays a Command Tower. He casts Talisman of Creativity. Jin-Gitaxias triggers, countering the spell. Zach casts Arcane Signet, entering tapped through Manglehorn. Zach passes. Cal draws and moves to combat. He attacks Zach with Lelia. Lelia triggers and Cal exiles Overmaster, giving Lelia a counter. Then Zach takes it, and in his second main phase, Cal casts Overmaster from exile. Prosper and Ginge attacks his trigger. Overmaster is countered, and Cal creates a treasure into play tapped through Manglehorn. He plays a snow-covered swamp for turn. He casts Bolus's Citadel from exile. Prosper triggers, and Cal creates a tapped treasure. Citadel enters tapped, Cal looks at the top card of his library and then moves to his end step. Prosper triggers, and Cal exiles Command Tower. Lelia triggers and gets a counter. Still in the end step, Ryan flashes in a Cathar Commando. Then Ryan sacrifices it, targeting Bolus's Citadel. Mayhem Devil triggers and kills Ryan's Avacyn's Pilgrim. Then Citadel is destroyed, and the turn moves to Ryan. Ryan draws, and in his first main phase, he has 3 green through his carpet. He plays a Horizon Canopy for turn. He casts his commander, Rocco, Cabaretti Caterer, where X equals 4. He fetches up a Ranger Captain of Eos onto the battlefield. It enters, and Ryan fetches up a Wirewood Symbiote into his hand. Ryan ends his turn. Chad draws, and in his first main phase, he has 2 blue through his carpet. He casts Wandering Archaic. Rashmi triggers, and Chad reveals a Wooded Foothills into his hand. He plays a Wooded Foothills for turn. He cracks it and pays a life. Mayhem Devil triggers and deals a damage to Manglehorn. He then fetches up a forest onto the battlefield. He casts Talisman of Curiosity. Ginge attacks his triggers and creates a copy. Chad ships the turn to Zach. Zach draws and plays a Tundra. He casts his commander, Tymna the Weaver. He cracks his Lion's Eye Diamond, discards his hand, and adds 3 blue. Mayhem Devil triggers and kills Ryan's Llanowar Elves. Zach casts his other commander, Kraum, Ludovic's Opus. He moves to Combat and attacks Cal with Kraum. Cal takes it, and in his second main phase, he pays a life and draws a card through Tymna. Zach passes the turn. During his draw step, Cal takes a damage from his Mana Vault. In his main phase, he plays a Command Tower from exile through Prosper. Prosper triggers, and in response, Cal cracks both of his treasures, floating to red. Mayhem Devil triggers twice and kills Manglehorn. Then Cal creates a treasure through Prosper. Next, Cal casts Reckless Impulse. Ginge attacks us, and Wandering Archaic trigger. Cal pays for Wandering Archaic, and Reckless Impulse is countered. Cal moves to combat and attacks Chad with Lelia. Lelia triggers, Cal exiles Demonic Tutor, and Lelia gets a counter. Chad takes 7, and in his second main phase, Cal casts Demonic Tutor from exile. Prosper, Archaic, and Kraum all trigger. Zach draws, Cal pays for Archaic, and then creates a treasure. Then Cal fetches up a card into his hand. Cal moves to his end step and exiles Deadly Dispute through Prosper. Lelia triggers and gets a counter. Still in the end step, Chad casts Cyclonic Rift, targeting Ranger Captain. Ginge attacks us, and Rashmi trigger. Chad reveals a Void Winnower into his hand through Rashmi, and then creates a copy of Rift, targeting Lelia. Lelia bounces, then Ranger Captain bounces. The turn moves to Ryan. Ryan draws, and in his first main phase, he has 3 white through his carpet. He recasts Ranger Captain of Eos. It enters, and he fetches up an Esper Sentinel into his hand. Ryan passes the turn. Chad draws, and in his first main phase, he has 3 green through his carpet. Chad convokes Court of Calling, where X equals 7. Rashmi and Ginge attacks his trigger. Chad creates a copy, and then fetches up a Nyx Bloom Ancient onto the battlefield. He then reveals a Spellseeker through Rashmi, casting it. Kraum triggers, and Zach draws. It enters, and Chad fetches up a Delay into his hand. Then the original chord resolves, and Chad fetches up a Coma, Cosmos Serpent, onto the battlefield. Next, Chad taps his mana for triple through Nyx Bloom Ancient and casts Void Winnower. It resolves, and Chad ends his turn. During Zach's upkeep, Chad creates a Serpent through Coma. Zach draws and moves to combat. He attacks Chad with Kraum. Chad takes it, and in his second main phase, Tymna triggers. In response, Zach casts Enlightened Tutor. Ginge attacks us, and Wandering Archaic trigger. Zach doesn't pay, Chad copies it, and fetches up an Isochron Scepter onto the top of his library. Then Ginge attacks us, counters Enlightened Tutor. With the Tymna trigger still in the stack, Zach casts Vampiric Tutor. Archaic triggers, Chad copies it, fetching up a card onto the top of his library and loses 2 life. Then Zach also fetches up a card onto the top of his library and loses 2 life as well. He then pays a life and draws a card through Tymna. Zach casts Toxic Deluge, paying 9 life. In response, Chad cracks his Lotus Petal to cast Delay. Mayhem Devil, Ginge attacks us, and Rashmi all trigger. Chad reveals a Nexus of Fate into his hand, copies Delay targeting Toxic Deluge, then Cal kills Ryan's Elvish Mystic. Then Delay counters and exiles Toxic Deluge with 3 time counters on it. With no other answers and shut down completely, Zach passes to Cal. During Cal's upkeep, Chad creates a Serpent off of Coma. During his draw step, Cal takes a damage from his Mana Vault. He plays a Mountain for turn. Cal recasts Lelia. He moves to combat and attacks Ryan with Lelia. Lelia triggers, Cal exiles Mana Confluence, and Lelia gets a counter. Ryan blocks with Rocco, and both die. Cal moves to his end step and exiles Baleful Mastery through Prosper. The turn moves to Ryan. During Ryan's upkeep, Chad creates a Serpent through Coma. Ryan draws, resigns to his fate, and passes to Chad. Everyone sees that they are dead to Chad's lock, concede, and Chad wins the game. Ladies and gentlemen, what a fun set of games tonight. Congrats to Ryan and Chad on their wins. In Game 1, Ryan was able to pull through the interaction and landed a smooth turn 3 win. He got lucky off of the brain freeze, ensuring it didn't hit any of his critical pieces. In Game 2, Chad completely steamrolled the table with his overwhelming advantage. The early Wheel of Fortune to disrupt Ryan unfortunately wheeled everyone into poor hands, and they were at the mercy of Chad the rest of the game. The most valuable card tonight is sponsored by Luxury Playstyle. They have the best quality accessories in the business. Check them out and pick up some counters, treasure tokens, and more. Be sure to use the code LUXWITHPOWER at checkout to get 15% off when you purchase. The most valuable card in tonight's game goes to Jin-Jitaxis. We thought about giving it to Mayhem Devil or Void Winnower, but it was this card that rocketed Chad ahead of the table. His advantage, along with everyone's lockdown, allowed Chad to resolve spell after spell until the table admitted defeat. Well, that about wraps it up for this episode. Tune in next time when we duke it out to see who will be king of the competitive EDH table. Thank you so much for watching, and we will see you next time.